Hopefully you have a few minutes to stretch the legs, do jumping jacks, run to the bathroom, whatever you wanted to do. So our next presentation takes us to a different vendor. So I would like to now introduce and welcome Ty Roberts from RealizeIt. RealizeIt is the first of its kind adaptive learning system where faculty can create their own digital course products tailored to the specific needs and preferences. And presenting with Ty is Ann Prush, Prabhu, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna kill your last name.
Prabhu good. Prabhu good. No.
Yo, perfect. Thank you. BMW, sorry about that.
BMW, yeah.
Now you know why I go by Audi. Casey Tart and Casey Tart. They're faculty members from the University of Central Florida, and we will welcome you and thank you very much. Take it from here.
Thank you, Audi. And welcome everybody to our spotlight session with RealizeIt today. Let's get my slides to advance. So today's session is going to have two parts. The first part will be presented by myself and my colleague Prabhu here with RealizeIt. The second part will be presented by, as you just were introduced to, Ann and Casey, who are two faculty members from the University of Central Florida. And they're going to share their perspectives, which I think you'll find very useful today. And I'll be reintroducing them shortly. The first couple slides here, for those of you that were able to join us last week in the lightning round, I just lifted a few slides just for some continuity. But you're going to see, I know you were listening to Lumen, our friends at Lumen. You'll see RealizeIt offers a really different perspective and a different set of options. But what we encourage our customers to really consider is how important is content and control for you. If you're using ready-to-use courseware off the shelf, you'll find that may work really well for many of you. You'll find that it's probably more restrictive and less flexible because it's already been designed for a general purpose and so forth. But if working with content such as OER content from many different sources, or you have your own supplemental content, and you really want control, you really want to have influence in how it's designed, how it flows, et cetera, then RealizeIt is really going to be an option that you're going to want to take a close look at. And look, it's very clear that the number one constraint is going to be the time, the faculty member's time. It always is. And we know that it's very important in how you invest that time. We know from years of experience that when there's less effort and energy that goes into deciding and thinking about how the courseware is going to fit into the course experience, very often there's little value that the faculty members realize at the end of it. And you're going to hear that it takes energy, it takes effort, it may be hard work, to build your own adaptive course product. That may or may not be true depending on the scope. But we do know over and over again that the more energy and effort and thinking that you put in up front, then much more likely you're going to extract the value and get the results that you're looking for. So with RealizeIt, with our customers, they really have an opportunity to create that teaching and learning experience that they've really always wanted, but may never had the time or the gumption to try to work on. And RealizeIt provides that opportunity. So each of you probably has your own mix of priorities, but when you work on tailoring something to suit your pedagogy, your domain, your specific situation, that's where you're probably going to get the most satisfaction and the most value. So starting to kind of segue to setting up the demonstration that Prabhu is going to take you in the system, is the journey with RealizeIt. It's very collaborative. We work with you very closely. It's kind of a 5-step process. It starts with the discovery process, which I'll come back to, then the design, then it goes into a development, kind of building the product up, delivering it, implementing it, and then using the data that comes from the student interactivity, your own interactivity, to iterate the product. Typically, that's about an 8 to 12 week process. It can be more or less, depending on some of the choices you may make, but you're supported every step of the way. And that's a hallmark for RealizeIt, is we're very hands-on, very supportive, not just through implementation, but also through the iteration of the product a few times. Just a little more color on this methodology, which we've been using for years now, is really the upfront portion, which you're probably not going to see in too many other options, is we really take the time up front to discover your current situation, your current course, your current outcomes, what's working, what's not working, what problem do you really want to solve for, what do you want Adaptive to do for you? These are critical conversations, and it may only be a few hours of conversations at the beginning, but it really, really helps you clarify, helps us clarify what the product needs to do for you, what the courseware needs to do for you and your students. That then leads to the design. And the design is really, there's a lot of different ways in which RealizeIt has been used across many domains. Oops, trying to get that. And this is really, Ken, when you talk about the energy and the effort in building a course, it's really this upfront part. We do a lot of the heavy lifting on the developing of it, the building of it, delivery, and so forth. But this is kind of the process, and I just wanted to frame that for you. I'm now going to turn it over to Prabhu, who's going to talk a little bit about what adaptivity is all about within RealizeIt, the different levels of adaptivity, and then show you an example of that in one particular course.
Thank you, Ty. Before I take you into the system to kind of show you a very quick demo of how Adaptivity works with RealizeIt, I want to try to paint the big picture first. When it comes to Adaptivity, obviously I want to kind of highlight the most common factors to which the learning experience adapts to, right? The first thing obviously is being student readiness. So let's say, for example, if the student is in a 200 level course, did they forget what they learned in their 100 level course? So are they ready to engage? Are they prepared properly? The second is a more forward-looking readiness, which is if I'm about to learn something, learn a module, do I already have some latent knowledge in what I'm about to learn, and can the learning experience be personalized for that? And so those are backwards-looking or forwards-looking, adaptivity factors. The other adaptivity factors, obviously, is how is the student doing at that moment in time? They learned the concept, they try to, demonstrate their mastery in a specific concept. Did they do well? Did they struggle? Did they struggle because they did not understand it properly, or did they struggle because they forgot some foundational concept that they learned a couple of weeks ago? So depending on all of these, different factors, the learning experience is automatically adapting. The good thing is the students do not need to understand how the adaptive engine works. They just have to look for recommendations, look for next steps, and they can just keep going. And the system is automatically making those decisions for them. Obviously, we're going to be dealing with a bunch of students who want to take controls into their own hands, and that's where adaptivity can be left to their preference. If they want to kind of take things on their own hands and they want to move into different areas, of course they can. So those are some of the ways the learning experience itself adapts. When it comes to teaching, when all of this learning experience is being adapted and the data is being collected, insights about the student's performance and progress is summarized and presented to instructors and teachers, so they can then adapt their interventions or interactions with students. Teachers' interaction with students starts with a lecture, whether it is online or face-to-face, or it's a one-on-one interaction where the student just walked into the office hours, or groups. There may be some subcategory of groups within the student body to kind of customize or personalize the interventions. So those are some of the ways how the system brings in adaptivity. And obviously I won't be able to show all of those factors, but I wanted to take a moment to at least show a couple of them by taking you into the system. All right, so let me share my screen. So the first thing is I've logged in as a student who's somewhere in the middle of working on one of the learning modules, right? So I'm learning linear equations. As you can see, I've completed all the 4 lessons that are part of the learning, of the module. So it's 4 out of 4, but I'm barely passing. I'm not doing that great. I'm barely passing. And if you look at the mastery bands, there's a lot of room to grow. right? So that's my current performance. And as you can see in the bottom right, the learning map, these are the 4 concepts that contribute to that are part of this module. So I'm going to just force myself and engage into a specific lesson. So let me just go into this lesson and start revisions process. So in this case, what I want to highlight is my current lesson performance in this specific lesson is at 80 to 82%. And then on the left, you see the learning content that is part of this lesson, right? So this is the learning content that the subject matter expert or the instructor handpicked and then curated to create this lesson. So there is learning. So if I go through the learning examples, and then I'm going to skip through some alternative content. I don't need it right now. And these are some interactive examples. And these examples are randomized, meaning the values that you see, the numbers that you see are randomly generated through some formulas. So that way, students are not seeing the same content over and over again. So I'm going to skip over the examples and go to the actual knowledge check, which actually contributes to my performance in this module. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to really bomb. I'm going to just do really, really poorly, just to kind of give you a sense of how the system performance is going to be different. So I'm, obviously not doing great, which is not hard for me in mathematics. So if I keep going, maybe just get maybe one question right. So in this case, as you can see, I've done really, really poorly. So if you look at it, my map changed pretty significantly. So in this case, the color coding is something that is indicative for the students, so that they can look at this and go, what are my areas I'm doing well? What are the areas that I need to focus on? So the map becomes a very easy way for us to look at. So if I go back to the lesson that I just struggled, I want to show you how the lesson itself now adapts, right? So if you look at it now, so I went into the same exact lesson. My learning path is now changed, right? The lesson path now, additional content is being added by the system because it noticed me struggle the first attempt. So the second time I come in, the system is pulling some additional content and making it available to me. So let me say if I go through that additional content, so it's gotten some content from some previous prerequisite foundational concepts. I go through that. And because of my poor performance, my performance or ability value dropped from 82% to 47%. And I've also gotten some additional examples and learning materials. So let's say I go through all of that, and then I'm about to do really, really good. So in this case, I've gone through the additional material, and if I do really good, and obviously, as you can see, the system is generating questions that are randomized and with variables, right? So I'm trying to do a better job now, right? One more question, and then, right. So I've done 5 out of 5 correct. So if I come back, and if you can see, the lesson, path will be now different. The learning map is now different. So as you're looking at things, every lesson experience is personalized, and then depending on every interaction, the system's recommendation as to what I should do next is also what you should do to improve is also changing. So it's an experience that is constantly looking for my most recent performance, and then based on my performance, it is recommending the best next step for me. Ultimately, the system's goal is to guide me as a student to complete as much material as possible and perform as well as possible while preserving and helping me with my confidence. It doesn't want me to just get to the finish line, but I'm completely winded, I hate math. We don't want to do that. But it wants to kind of balance the ability and the challenge so that I can get across the finish line, but still, feeling good about my accomplishments. So that's the student experience in a nutshell. There are other factors that I'm not showing at this moment. So let me skip over to the instructor experience, just to give you a sense. So in this case, it's a slightly busier, more involved learning map. So let's look at, what the instructor, depending on the context or the teacher, they're going to need different insights at various points in time, right? Let's say, for example, you're about to walk into a lecture or to a Zoom conference where you're going to address 200 students, and they are preparing, they were supposed to complete a class prep module in RealizeIt, right? So, and if this is the module that, that it was, and when you look at this module, this is the class average performance and progress that you're observing here, right? So you look at this, at a quick glance, you'll be able to see students are generally struggling in 4 topics or 4 lessons. So you can immediately, personalize the class lecture to say, if you have, 15 topics to cover, obviously you're going to be spending a little bit more time on these concepts. You're going to be spending a little less time on these concepts. So it allows you to, not just look at the, the insight in real time, but based on real-time insights, you're able to then, personalize the interactions with students. Let's say, for example, a student walks into your office for an office hour. It's a one-on-one interaction. So let's say Michael walks in. And then when you click on Michael as an individual, then the map changes. The map is now showing specifically Michael's performance as a big bubble. The small bubble on the top right corner is the class average. So you're not just seeing how Michael is doing, you're seeing how Michael is doing in comparison to the class average. So you can then make appropriate. So Michael is an interesting student who's, he takes time to get to a green star in every single node before he proceeds. So he's a very methodical learner, which is not bad, but he may be lagging behind, right? And there may be other students who are, so this is a good example. This student is somebody who doesn't wait to gain a green star in every lesson. She's more breadth first. She wants to cover a lot of lessons. Even if it is not good, she may come back and improve. So you're looking at different styles of students. You can look at this, these things. The other, information that you can look at is students grouped by different categories. So in this case, students are being grouped who are lagging behind. So these are the students who are, if you see they're progressing okay, but they're all lagging behind compared to the class average. And here are the students who are working ahead. So students who are generally really fast and working ahead, how do you challenge them and how do you keep them engaged and motivated? So you can look at these categories to see the system will automatically filter them and give it to you in different categories, so you can take appropriate intervention strategies, but to students. So those are some of the high-level insights that are available to the instructors, whether they are interacting with students one-on-one or they're interacting with students as a group or the entire class, right? So I think those are the key areas that I wanted to cover in terms of giving you an overview. What I can do now is to stop share and then pass it back to you, Ty, or?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And I do notice some questions are coming in, and as I can, I will try to answer those as we go along. So I know it was brief. Certainly, if this piques your interest, there's an awful lot more that we can show you, but let's now move to part 2 of this spotlight session, because this is really where I want to introduce Anne Pruka and Casey Tart from University of Central Florida. And we really wanted, obviously Prabhu just showed a STEM example, which is what most people think of when they think of adaptive. It's a bit of a myth. There are many, many non-STEM courses that make very good use of adaptive. And Anne and Casey are quite experienced in the journey of starting with a pilot and then progressing and making more use of adaptive. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Anne and Casey.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, hi.
If you want to progress to the next slide, Ty. Thanks.
Okay, so here with the first slide, I'll just start out by saying that I was first kind of presented with the idea of adaptive learning in the summer of 2017. And so from there, kind of the intrigue with it was born for me. And so one of the first reasons that I was so interested in learning more was the potential freedom that I saw in being able to use a system like this. I am always creating things for my classroom, always looking for new ways to help my students learn. And with this, I saw how I could take something and give it to them in real time without having to go through the publisher or go outside of the textbook to do these things. Real world application was another thing for me that was really important. I tend to survey my students at the beginning of my courses and ask them kind of what their goals are for the class, you know, how much Spanish maybe they already know, things like that. And so a lot of what was in the textbook and was delivered in the courseware seemed really canned to me. And, you know, our university, 25% or more at this point of our student body identifies as Hispanic. And so a lot of times they were saying things to me like, Professor, we're not like this, or that's not true, or we don't, you know, and so they weren't finding it relatable. And so I wanted something where I could really get that real world application there, and they could be part of the learning process as well. Also, using RealizeIt, it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. A lot of time with the textbook or the courseware, whatever homework I chose for a certain topic, everyone just had to do that. And with RealizeIt and adaptive learning, they're able to kind of have their own path. Students come in at many different levels. Most of our students at the university level have had some exposure to Spanish, whether it's in high school or their family, or just living in a community where their neighbors are Hispanic. And so that not having a one-size-fits-all product was also something that really appealed to me when I first saw RealizeIt presented. And just adaptive learning beyond STEM, you know, when it was presented, I immediately emailed my instructional designer, Jessica Toho, who's with us today. She was not my instructional designer at the time, but I mean, she will tell you, like, it was minutes after I saw that presentation that I emailed her and said, can I do this in Spanish? And the reply was, well, no one has done this in languages at UCF, but I don't know why not. And so from there, we kind of started, because, you know, Ann and I talk about this all the time, but when I'm speaking with my students and I'm teaching them a grammar point, I'll say, you know, this is like the formula you would use for this expression, or this is the, you know, so, I mean, linguistics is a science. The way our brain works is a science. And so I saw that adaptive learning could fit really well, at least in my mind, into language learning.
Right, it's not only for STEM, like a lot of people think. So can you advance to the next slide, Ty?
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, so we wanted to give you a little background on what we did with adaptive learning and RealizeIt. We worked to redesign 2 elementary Spanish courses, Spanish 1 and Spanish 2. I'm not going to, you know, use the course codes because it doesn't really matter. They're all different at every university, but it's an elementary Spanish sequence. It's a gen ed course. It serves a lot of students. We were approached by Dr. Wendy Howard of our Pegasus iLab, which is part of our Center for Distributed Learning, to participate in this project to incorporate adaptive learning into gateway courses. And so we redesigned these 2 courses. We were originally going to use publisher content and have it ingested into RealizeIt, but the publisher whose book and courseware system we were using for these courses just kept dragging their feet. So finally we said, forget it. We don't have any more time to wait because we need to get to work. And so we decided that we would jettison that, we would go our own route, and we used open educational resource materials. We used a lot of our own materials, and Spanish, well, language instructors in general, I have found over my years of experience, we love to create our own materials. And no matter how robust the textbook is or whatever it has, we still always do it all the time. So we already had this treasure trove of materials. We had materials that other people had shared with us, OER. So we just decided, we created our own scope and sequence, and then we decided what we wanted in terms of content, and we actually input all that content, which was the combination of OER and our own materials, into RealizeIt. So that is our textbook, if you will, and then all of our practice activities, which is the homework. Again, we put that into adaptive learning. Could we go to the next slide?
And I want to clarify, when Ann says we put it in, yes, we came up with all the content, but it was our instructional designer, Jessica, who was putting the things into RealizeIt for us. Now, we've learned things along the way, and we have to have some refreshers every now and then in the system for them to show us, you know, for her to show us what to do So we have a little more autonomy there now, but Jessica was really there with us just every step of the way, supporting us and also guiding us,
Yes.
you know, as far as what we could do in the system.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about some of our reasons for this course redesign. And if you look at the bullet points on the left-hand side of your screen, the ones that were really driven by Ann and I, you know, things that we saw as challenges, if you will, in our classroom was primarily prior knowledge of the subject matter. We do not have a placement exam for Spanish at our university, and we have students coming in at all levels. And they're getting advising from many different places, maybe College of Arts and Humanities, maybe within our own department, things like that. So there was a breakdown also in advising. And so we really saw this as a way to immediately address a lot of this prior knowledge of the subject matter. When Prabhu was showing us how students can come in and they can do, you know, before they get to the knowledge check, they can go ahead and do a few questions that will show maybe how much they know. So if they show mastery of a subject or a topic, let's say ser y estar, they don't have to do 50 exercises or 50 questions on ser y estar. They can move on to conjugations and the present indicative, for example. So that was one of the main reasons. We saw that it would kind of maybe level out some of those issues of all these different levels in our classroom. Also, online delivery mode challenges. When you're in a classroom and you're face-to-face with a group of students and you're teaching something in particular, you can kind of look around the room, see your audience, and know if something's working or not, know if they're understanding, how are they working together. And while you're not in complete isolation in an online classroom, it can sometimes feel that way to the students. And so with the analytics that you also saw in the math course that Prabhu showed us, you can look at all of these things and really know what's happening in your classroom and how students are progressing. I know I look at students that are lagging behind. I even look at the emojis. You saw the one happy face emoji, and the ones that are sad or frustrated with their knitted brow, I would go ahead and email each one of them individually and just say, what's going on, or how are you feeling? Or I saw, you know, in this particular module, maybe you had kind of a sad face, and they'll say, oh my gosh, it's because of this, this, and this. But it really allows me to kind of get there with my students, you know, one-on-one. And just traditional textbook and courseware fatigue, and I alluded to this earlier. Not only students fatigue with the traditional textbook and courseware, but also us as instructors. And so that was a way that we, you know, could kind of got away from that with this redesign. We didn't have to worry about that as much anymore. And finally, Anne spoke about how this is a gen ed course for us. These students in this sequence, this serves over 3,000 plus students over fall, spring, and summer. It's a requirement for most of our majors in the College of Arts and Humanities. And of course, we have students coming in from other majors as well. But this has a potential and had the potential to affect a lot of students. So that was another reason. We were always looking for a better way to serve them.
Right. And I just want to make one point about the traditional textbook and courseware fatigue. Between the two of us, we've been teaching at the university level. We've been teaching Spanish for over 40 years. It may even be like 46 years, you know, combined. And there have been some great textbooks we've used. There have been some weaker textbooks that we've used, great courseware, weaker courseware. Of course, I can remember going back to the hard copy paper lab manual and workbook. Well, so can she. But the point is that I've been doing this myself for 33 years at another institution and now at UCF. And the same issues that we have been dealing with since then, starting 33 years ago, with prior knowledge of subject matter, delivery mode challenges in the online environment. We've been teaching online now for over 8 years. They have not gone away. And so the textbook, the traditional textbook and courseware does not eliminate these problems and doesn't really address these problems. So I'll probably get back to that in a bit. But so on the left-hand side, as Casey mentioned, these were really things that were driven by us and by our interest and our goals for our students. On the right-hand side, these are driven by us as well, but they were also really driven by the university. The course redesign initiative under which we did our project is sponsored by UCF's Board of Trustees, and it is administered by our Pegasus iLab, and one of the main objectives of it is to increase student success and learning. And so student success, which is a grade of A, B, or C, is one of the goals. Decreasing drop, fail, withdrawal rates is another goal. And so they have decided that adaptive learning is one of the tools that we're going to use to address these challenges and to help our students with their learning and to help them to be more successful, and also to help them so that they don't have to withdraw from the class and lower the drop and fail rates. Another thing is the student evaluations. I didn't go into this hoping to increase my student evaluations because they are pretty good in general. I usually get really good feedback from my students, but our student evaluations actually have improved since we started using adaptive learning, and I'll address that again in a later slide. But another really, really big deal here is the textbook cost to student. The traditional textbook and courseware system we were using is $275. That's for the textbook, ebook, or hard copy, whatever you prefer, plus the courseware, the online courseware to do the homework and other things. So that's $275. It can be used for Spanish 1 and Spanish 2, but a lot of students only take Spanish 2 because they don't have to take Spanish 1, but they still have to spend the $275. So then we come to issues of equity. $275 is a lot of money for a lot of students. A lot of students cannot afford it. And for some bizarre reason, a lot of our students don't get their financial aid money dispersed until the second or third week of the semester. So then they've spent the first 2 or 3 weeks without having the book. And there's like this panic because they're behind and we have to help them get caught up. Some of our students don't have great internet access. Accessing the publisher courseware can be an issue. A lot of times having to set up the courseware for each individual class and each individual student is very, very cumbersome, and there are technical issues, glitches, if you don't have the right browser, if you don't have the right computer speed. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that having dropped all that and gone to RealizeIt has virtually eliminated all of these problems. And the students do not have to spend any money because, well, for fully online classes, they don't, because the cost of RealizeIt is covered by their technology fee. So we also get into issues of equity here, and not everybody is technically savvy. So when the publisher courseware was, bringing up all of these technical glitches, they were bringing them to me, and I'm not a tech person. And then I would have to push them off on someone else, and they didn't like that. And there were just always a lot of complaints and a lot of problems, but we don't have that anymore. So that's a relief.
Yes, and I will agree with that too. I mean, it got to the point where I felt like I was doing more around the technology in the course, especially in my online courses, than I was actually answering questions about the content and teaching to my students. And so reasons for sticking with it and just staying the course with adaptive learning, I always say this, and I've said it to Ty and Prabhu and really anybody that will listen to me, I'm never going back. I don't miss the textbook. I don't miss the courseware. My students are so invested in this. I'm so invested in this. I mentioned freedom before. I mentioned freedom a lot. I'm not a super control freak in all aspects of my life, but when it has to do with my students and their learning, I like to be in control in the sense that I want to be giving them not only the best of myself, but the best of what there is to offer so that they're actually learning something. I have so many students that come into my Spanish classes and say, well, I took 2 years in high school, but I don't remember anything. I didn't learn anything. Nothing stuck with me. And in this way, when they're using adaptive learning and they're working toward mastery and they're repeating a skill that maybe they had trouble with before, it really is sticking. And it's anecdotal, but I'm getting emails now that, my students are telling me, I actually learned this. I know what this means now. I understand the concept. I wasn't just repeating something. And just creativity, because again, I come up with something and I can get in touch with Jessica, or I can even go in there now if I create an infographic or find one that I like or find a video that I like, I can go in and adapt my learning content right then in that moment, reset the system, and my students have that available to them. the autonomy that goes along with it, customization, so I kind of got ahead of myself there, but it's what I was just describing. Student preference and demand. So the first semester I used this, it was just to see how the system worked. And I used it mostly as a review, and it was optional. So my students didn't even have to do it if they didn't want to. I just said, look, you know, I'm using this, and if you want to review for each one of the, you know, unit quizzes, you can do it in this way. Then I found out that we were changing the textbook. So I thought, well, I'm not going to move forward into 1121 for us, so Spanish 2, using this because it would be a lot of work and we would only be able to use it for a few weeks, 14, 15 weeks. And I had students writing to me saying, Profe, where is my RealizeIt? They were looking for it outside of, you know, and it was an optional thing the first semester. So student preference and demand, you know, they saw the value in it, and I thought, okay, I need to keep working and exploring this. And that's the same feedback in most cases that I'm getting now. And just that student-centered focus, you know, to know that a student will start with this content, they're learning, and it's just going to keep leading them down the path that's going to make them most successful. It's going to adapt and give them what they need. For me, that is everything.
Yeah, so it really
So
is.
I know,
Go ahead.
so Ann and Casey, I just wanted to be just a time check. I know we wanted to go into a Q&A, so we've got a few minutes left.
Okay,
If
great.
you want to touch on the high points here.
Absolutely.
tell me-
So this, I mentioned before how many years we've been teaching Spanish combined at the college level. This truly for me is innovative and cutting edge because I've never seen anything like it. It's always been the traditional textbook courseware. This is very different because it truly does adapt to what students bring to the table and what they need to work on to acquire the language to meet the learning objectives. There's more focus on my teaching, less focus on me having to deal with technical issues. They can focus on their learning, not focus on technical problems. And as Keisha mentioned at the outset, there was a lot of work to create this. We worked very closely with Jessica. But now that we're in semester, we finished semester 3 with it, there's less work. We continue to increase what we have in there, to tweak it, to better it, to make it nicer, prettier, but the heavy lifting is over, and that really comes at the beginning. We have some preliminary data we'll share with you that Dr. Howard shared with us from our very first semester, which was, if you want to advance the slide, Ty, which was in fall of 2018, we used the traditional textbook and courseware. In spring 19, we used RealizeIt and Adaptive Learning for the first time. So in these two courses, you'll see that our student success rates went up 23 and 22 points respectively. That's 91% and 87% of students earned A, B, or C grades. And those points went up, like I said, 23 and 22. Next slide, please. Our withdrawal rates went down, so the negative numbers here are very good. 7% of students, 3% of students withdrew, and those numbers are down by 13 and 7 points. Can we go to the next slide? And then for our evaluations, this is on a scale of 5. You'll see that for Spanish 2, they went up almost half a point. These are students, so let me just clarify that these are students comparing taking Casey's course or my course, the same course with the same professor, one semester traditional textbook and courseware, and then spring 19 taking it with RealizeIt and Adaptive Learning. So the Spanish 2 kids had taken it with traditional textbook and courseware, and then they took it with Adaptive Learning, RealizeIt with our content, and the evaluations, their perception of the course and the teaching and the learning and the materials went up in terms of very good, excellent, rating me in the course that way by almost half a point. And then for Spanish 1, that came in and never had used the traditional textbook and courseware, it went up 0.14. So that's preliminary data. We think it's pretty good. I was very excited when I saw my evaluations because they were the highest I'd ever gotten in my 20 years at UCF, and I almost fell off my chair. So really quickly, we'll wrap up by sharing past, present, and future.
Yeah, so in fall 2017, like I described, I used it as just that optional component of my classroom. It was in 3 courses that I was teaching, and it affected around 100 students. Then from spring 2019 to spring 2020, we've now taught it 3 different semesters with 7 to 8 course sections per semester, and that has had an effect on 200 to 250 students per semester. Fall 2022, more colleagues are joining us. We're going to have 14 sections. We're up to 500 students.
Yep, and eventually our program, the idea is to implement this across our program, which will serve 3,000 plus students per year. Other colleagues are jumping on the adaptive learning bandwagon and are working with Jessica and other instructional designers in Portuguese, Italian, French, and German. Casey is getting her advanced Spanish grammar and composition course for the fall ready using RealizeIt and adaptive learning for all the homework. She's doing that right now, working by herself, unfortunately.
And we'll with Jessica.
But,
Yeah,
well, not with me, but with Jessica. But our colleagues in the other languages are employing it in many different ways. You know, there's many different ways you can do it. So yeah, so that's about it. We have one more slide, and it's really just where to start. And 2020, we recommend that you work with somebody, a partner or a small group. It makes it a lot easier. It makes it fun. This is definitely a commitment.
Yeah, and I would just say, don't think that you have to go all in like we did. You don't have to redesign your entire course. You can start how I did, and if there's a certain maybe concept that students always have trouble with in your class. I mean, I was just talking with an anthropology professor at UCF, and he had, you know, something that he said, my students always struggle with this. And so he had just adapted that one module using adaptive learning, and he had already seen an increase, you know, in his student success rate. Mm-hmm. So you can bite off a little bit, or you can eat the whole sandwich like I did. I tend to just jump and go. And just once you make that commitment, just stay the course. And students really do notice the difference. I mean, you can see it in the data, but you can also anecdotally, I mean, we both are getting emails, you know, students are always telling us, you know, how much they like it. It's so much better, that they really appreciate it, that they felt like it was for them. And it is, it's just for them. It's their own kind of, you know, we have all these different individualized lessons for all the students in our class.
So that's it. And thank you very much for listening. And we'd love to take your questions if you have them. Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.
Good.
Questions?
Thank you. Well, I'm sorry, real quick, one wrap up, and actually I see Minette has asked a question. So just to wrap that up, one, thank you to Casey and Ann. There's a wealth of experience there. But, you know, RealizeIt is not an off-the-shelf provider the way a few others are. But we have developed over 1,000 course products in all STEM and non-STEM areas. So, but we do have some courses that others have designed and implemented at other universities that they are open to licensing if someone wanted to start there as a starting point. But I know I heard in the last call, nursing, allied health, some things where you're not getting traditional courseware. We have nursing programs, engineering programs, and courses that have been developed by others. So it is quite a bit. So we would like to open up to questions. I'm sorry if I cut you off, Audi. But I'm also putting contact information up here. Please, anything related to RealizeIt, just reach out to me directly. If there's something that you think Casey or Ann, you'd be curious to follow up,
Yeah,
this is their contact information.
Yeah.
So yes, questions, please. I see some in the chats as well that I've been trying to answer.
Go ahead. You didn't really interrupt me. All I was going to say is there might be some questions. People can put them in the chat, and hopefully you can answer them.
Okay. Well, we did look in the chat, and they seem to be more general questions. One of them that someone asked is about whether or not you can make changes. That's one of the things that we really like about RealizeIt, because it's our own content, but if there is something, there's a mistake, and believe me, there were some mistakes, and we caught them and students caught them, or when we decided we wanted to change something around, we could work with Jessica to get that done for us. But Jessica also has trained us on how to access RealizeIt and make our own changes. So that gives us a lot of freedom to make the changes that we want in our content and in the homework and the activities and pretty much what have you. One thing that I would say, just to make it clear, we we are using RealizeIt to house the course content, which is really the textbook, if you will, and then all of the practice and homework activities. We are not using it for open-ended instructor-graded activities. We're putting those in Canvas, but our aim is to do that in RealizeIt soon. So like I said before, you know, you can use it in many different configurations. There's so many different ways to use it.
And to answer Maureen's question, it does integrate with our LMS in the sense that it is set up to automatically generate and populate after the due date in our gradebook and things like that. The students do go in to RealizeIt through the LMS. It opens in another window, but it is integrated in the sense that they access it from LMS. We use Canvas personally, and then once their grades are in there after the due date, it does automatically populate that and continues to update them as students go in and continue to work on certain topics even past the due date for mastery.
And to answer,
another question. Oh, go ahead.
No, to answer Keith's question, I don't know if there's an authoring platform that you could preview, but so we've used RealizeIt to put our own content in that we authored, but originally we were going to use it to ingest and the publisher content in RealizeIt. We decided not to, like I mentioned, because the publisher was dragging its feet. So, you know, that's two separate ways to do it. You know, you could use publisher content and RealizeIt. You can use your own content and RealizeIt. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but it definitely, I hope it clarifies what we did versus other things you can do.
One of the questions from Michael is, you know, yes, the platform is accessibility compliant. It doesn't automatically make content necessarily accessible. It depends on the source of that content, but we work very closely with you to make sure that everything in the course is accessibility compliant.
Yes.
You answered Keith's question.
Well, he had a follow-up.
Yeah, if there's interest in you know what it's like in authoring, we can do that certainly as a follow-up on the back end of the system of what's involved with that. But again, we usually provide that service for our customers in the original design development. Let's see, I'm not sure if I'm keeping up with all the questions. Maybe I'm not. Keith said, what would the workflow and budget model look like if a faculty member wanted to convert 5% of a course? Keith, we would sit down with you and obviously try to figure out what does 5% look like in your context, and what the workflow would be in that. I really have to understand your circumstances to probably give you a proper answer, so forgive me. I don't mean to be evasive. I just need to understand what your scope is.
He also followed up with that in the charge to students.
Yeah, so I can only
RealizeIt's licensing model is, generally speaking, you know, RealizeIt's licensing fee is per course taker. And I don't know, we don't have anything arranged with SUNY at this point, but it's typically $30 per course taker, which sometimes the university pays, sometimes that's passed on to the student. Entirely depends on the institution and their policies. And then there might be some service charges for development depending on the situation and the volume, but that's all negotiable.
Kind of a follow-up, I'm assuming that the more students you have at an institution, right, in a system, in a contract with you, then there's more leverage for that service, extra service fee, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, look, we've got, RealizeIt has customers that have as many as 300, 400, 500 courses in their portfolio, okay? We've got others who have one. Some have 5, some have 50, some have 80. So you can imagine, right, we have a whole portfolio of customers of all different sizes and shapes. But look, it's important to really right-size the licensing, the services to every individual course and every individual faculty, because that's what this is all about, is really individualized success at the student level, the faculty level, the course level, and then you can scale that across the institution So it's a different conversation with administrators than it often is with an individual faculty member.
Yep, sounds good. Well, I think we have reached out the end of our time. I have that I'm supposed to do the closing remarks at 3:55. So thank you very much, Ty, Prabhu, and
Thank you
Casey.
all.
I got all four of you.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you very much. And so before we leave, I just wanted to a reminder to join us next week for the third installment of the fourth Wednesday series on Wednesday, July 8th at 2 p.m. for a deeper look this time at cookbooks and the Carnegie Mellon University's Open Learning Initiative, OLI. Registration remains open for the symposium, so feel free to invite your colleagues to join us next week. So if you have anyone else that hasn't joined, please just share the link, not the link to your access, but the link for the registration. And we will be using the same link to join next week. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Audi. We appreciate it.
Thank you
Very much.